Hey everyone, welcome to a Tuesday edition of the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Dan Labbe with Mary Kay Cabot. We've got some leftover Hey MK questions to get to here on a Tuesday and some other Browns topics that we can get into if we want as we go along here, Mary Kay. But let's start here. We get questions like this all the time. And I think we're going to continue to get questions like this, but I'll ask it anyway from the 317 area code. And this comes, of course, in light of Zadarius Smith and his acquisition. Hey, Mary Kay, with all the moves made this offseason, if the Browns go above 500 but miss the playoffs, is Kevin Stefanski safe? So I guess, 9-8 or 10-7, but they still miss the playoffs. I know you've said you feel like the Haslams expect the playoffs, but I guess, is there a scenario where maybe they have a really good record and somehow miss the playoffs and Kevin's not on the hot seat?
Yeah, I think everything would have to be taken into account. I don't think you can put a number on it and say if they go 9-8 and they miss the playoffs, are Kevin Stefanski and some of these other guys getting fired? I don't think you can do it like that. I think what you're going to have to do after the season, in the event that they don't make the playoffs, you have to evaluate the whole thing. If they lost 4 games by 1 point, or they lost in overtime 3 times and they narrowly missed the playoffs, that's different than the wheels coming off and things falling apart and getting blown out in games and DeShaun Watson not looking good. If DeShaun looks good and the Browns somehow just don't make it because they are in the very difficult AFC North with Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson and the solid across the board Steelers, I think you have to weigh all of that. I just don't know that you could point blank say, this is what we're going to do if this happens.
Look, I've certainly got questions about Kevin, and I think that there've been some really good moments, obviously, and I think there's been some concerning moments as well. But I think going into the season and saying they have to get this far or he's gone, I just don't know if that works. And kind of based on what they've done over these last 4 years, they've been very patient and they've sort of changed the way they do business in a lot of ways. And I just think some sort of knee-jerk reaction, if they were to go 10-7 somehow and miss the playoffs, or even 9-8, and like you said, maybe they lose in Cincinnati that last game on a 52-yard field goal by Evan McPherson. Is that 52-yard field goal going to determine Kevin's fate? I don't know. I don't think the Haslams have come this far and kind of tried to sort of stabilize how they do business just to sort of have a knee-jerk reaction at the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. The Steelers, they have consistency over all of these years. You don't have to worry every year, is Mike Tomlin on the hot seat? Now, of course, Mike Tomlin always has a winning season. We know that about him. He's never had a losing season, which is quite remarkable. And I am a huge Mike Tomlin fan. But, I just don't think that you can put a label on it, because seasons take on a life of their own and it has a certain vibe. When you get to the end of a season, you kind of know what the vibe is, what it feels like. If it feels like it was a complete and total failure, like it did in 2019 under Freddie Kitchens. If your quarterback's trajectory is upward, if the wheels are coming off. So I think it all has to do with that. I mean, if you lose an overtime game in week 18 against the Bengals, and that's how you don't make the playoffs, again, like you said, or on a Evan McPherson field goal or whatever the case may be, I just don't think they're going to pull the plug on this regime. I think they really love Kevin Stefanski. They love Andrew Berry. They really like where they're going with all this. Yes, the expectation is to make the playoffs. You don't go out and get all these guys and spend all this money and put your fan base through the controversy of DeShaun Watson if you don't expect to make the playoffs. But, if you've made tremendous progress and for whatever reason it just didn't happen, but things looked really good along the way, I think there's a case for bringing everyone back.
And so much of it does depend on kind of how DeShaun feels, right? I mean, if DeShaun kind of looks at this and decides, I just don't know if this is right, that's got to carry some weight in the decision-making process, because he is he's your quarterback, and he's the guy that you paid $230 million to. So it's not necessarily that he's the one just calling the shots, and he'll go up to the Haslams and say, I want this guy gone, and he's gone. But if he had some concerns, or if he kind of got through the end of this year and didn't feel like maybe Kevin was the guy, I'm sure that voice would carry a lot of weight in that building.
Yeah, it would. But, I mean, there are other ways to go about this besides even firing Kevin Stefanski. If for some reason the offense didn't perform the way people wanted it to, you could still keep Kevin Stefanski as the head coach and then bring in a new offensive coordinator, or turn play calling duties over to Alex Van Pelt or whatever. You could get a whole new vibe from the play calling that way. I still think that they view Kevin Stefanski as their CEO coach of the future, their long-term guy to run the show. They really, really love what he brings to the table. So even in that scenario, if DeShaun was like, no, this just isn't working for me, there are other things that you could do besides blowing the whole thing up.
How closely are Kevin and